Have you ever been at an event and wondered who hired that speaker who put the audience to sleep? Or been the speaker at an event who wished the stage had an escape hatch? Yeah, we're on a mission to end this. Welcome to the Doug Thompson podcast, where event planners and professional speakers come together to create amazing events. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, storyteller and professional speaker. Grab your beverage of choice, settle in, and let's get started. Hey, everybody. My guest this week is John Coyne. And we go way back, so he may tell some stories which, may offend some of you. Anyway, he's a nerd of the purest sense of the form. Since a very young age, John's been dabbling in the world of tech. He's worked with giants such as Amazon and Microsoft. That's where our story started, was back at Microsoft. But has also helped several startups make their way. John is also an animal advocate, running his own nonprofit rescue called 9 Lives Rescue and Rehab Support, which, we don't have enough of that. So, John, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Doug. Good to be here.
I am so happy. I've been looking forward to this conversation all week. In that, again, we go way back. From your tech thing, you're sort of now in the ranks of the needing to find a new gig. But the whole bird rescue thing is also. I mean, just yesterday, you had one of your longtime family members, I would say, pass on. So again, condolences there for that. But tell us a little bit more about yourself that this wonderful intro didn't do.
Yeah. So, I'm a storyteller, much like you, right? As a career, I have made my way working with sales organizations, marketing organizations, technical organizations. I've been in the industry now for, I hate to admit it, I think it's about 30 years this year. That's a long time. It's you and me, Doug. We're the dinosaurs. And it's, and all throughout that process, I've been a storyteller, right? So take a piece of tech, take something that's super complex, and boil it down into, business logic, business value, plain English, for lack of a better word. As a matter of fact, I had a boss back in the day. It was, I want to say early 2000s. He said, John, he goes, you are a certified translator of nerd to business. He said, that's your title. And he said, we should put that on your business card. And I said, well, it's a little long for a business card, but it's sort of stuck, right? And you see, I think I throw that up on my LinkedIn profile. And, that's something that I wear as sort of a badge of honor, right? Is not everybody's technical, right? I mean, I spend a ton of time with folks that aren't technical and, have to help them wade the waters of, all this newfangled technology, as they call it. Sometimes it's AI, sometimes it's something simple like password management, or, hardware. Hey, what computer should I get? Or I want to design a kiosk or a device. And so I've been, sort of all the gamut back and forth. I mean, I've made my way as of the last several years, doing a lot of things like smart home, smart controls, home automation. I've got a little consultancy here in Seattle that I do. I started as sort of a side project, and with my exit from Amazon most recently, I'm spending a lot more time doing that in a full-time capacity. As a matter of fact, just got a box this morning of some newfangled strip lights to check out and test and see how they work. And I'm working with a local restaurant up the street right now to help them. They've got the back of their bar area has, where all the bottles and glasses are. They've got these strip lights back there, but they're like pretty old, and they use like an IR remote control, and there are 3 separate remotes. There are 3 separate zones. I mean, it's all kinds of stuff. So they said, look, if you can make this thing better for us, fantastic. Like, they want to be able to change the colors when it's Christmas time, or change the colors when it's, time for the Seahawks, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what a lot of what I'm doing right now is trying to help people make their homes smarter. It sort of parlays into a lot of the work I did at Amazon, which was in the age tech space. We built a version of Alexa for the seniors who live in places like with senior living centers, assisted living, independent living, things like that. So we helped build a program or a product that was really specifically to help them, so they could do things like if they fell down in their apartment, which happens. And a lot of these guys have those little pendants around their necks, or a watch that they wear that they can call for help with. But a lot of times they're not wearing them when they're in their own apartment. And so, we had an issue where a lady fell in her apartment, and she was able to use Alexa at the time to, call for help. And it's simple as, Alexa, I need help. That kind of thing, right? So it's a lot of fun. So I've kind of played around in a lot of different areas, but all the way through, it's telling the story. It's telling, hey, why will this Alexa thing be really good for you? Or, hey, why is voice important in the age of AI and things like that.
Yep, I think that's why we hit it off back in the day, because that's what we did. And there was a group of us. We were sort of this rare animal that spoke both. Spoke both. You could go into a room with the nerds and have a nerd level conversation about things, and then you're talking to the people that normally you don't like to interface with customers. They should be sort of kept and fed under the door. We had our share of those as well. And then go to the customer and say, here's what we can do. Here's the demands. Have you thought about in a language they understand? And that's I don't know where we learned that. I've sort of picked things up along the way that I learned that worked. But a lot of it's trial and error. Where that didn't land. I need to find a better way to explain that. How about you? Where do you think that all sort of came from?
I have an interesting background. I grew up very much a nerd with, my dad was a communications engineer. He built radio transmitter, television transmitter systems. He had lots of lives. He worked in the oil fields for a time. He was a commercial industrial electrician. And that's really where I learned my tech kind of chops, right? I mean, I took a stereo apart that he gave me for a gift when I was like 11 years old, and he grounded me until I could put it back together. No pun intended on the grounding thing, but, and so it was that kind of stuff, right? And so then as coming up, I actually wasn't a big sports guy. I was more into things like music and the theater and stuff like that. So I spent a lot of time in the professional theater, like on stage and backstage and things like that. And I think that's, part of where I learned my confidence to speak in front of large groups of people, right? Or even small groups of people, but be the center of attention, right? While I'm talking. And then along the way, as technology, started to evolve, especially in the age of the World Wide Web, as it were, right? With, back in the CompuServe and the AOL days and all that stuff. I had tons and tons of friends and family that just could not figure it out, right? I mean, they'd go spend, thousands of dollars on a computer and they'd promptly break it. And so then I'd wind up, fixing their computers for them. And then along the way, teaching them, hey, look, back in the day, you remember, Doug, the computer sales, like you walk into CompUSA or you walk into one of those companies, and the sales guys they were paid on commission, right? And they were like car salesmen, right? Oh, well, you get this new, add an extra 2 megabytes of RAM and you could actually add this and add that. And next thing you know, you got a $10,000 computer that you're literally going to do word processing with, right?
Yeah, bigger, faster, better was always sort of the mantra for them, right?
Yeah. And so, along the way, I learned to tell people, and learn to show people, hey, look, here's this as it stands now. Here's what it could be. Here's the difference. And here's why you want the difference, kind of thing. Right. Or when I translate that into, IoT type hardware, right? Well, hey, you've got the base unit here that can do only so much. And if you want to be able to have all the bells and whistles, and you want to be able to, look at this thing autonomously, have it operate autonomously, and you want to be able to monitor it, you want to be able to do this and do that, you're going to need these things. And what that's going to do is it's going to save you money over time, because if you can remote monitor something, that's less truck rolls. Or if you can make this thing so that the operating system doesn't crash, or if it does crash, it auto reboots or things like that, that helps a lot of folks. I mean, as you well know, like the number one question in tech support, right? Did you restart it? Right. I mean, so it's, that kind of thing. And so along the way, I learned that, hey, I can sit and talk in ones and zeros and nibbles and bytes, but it's going to be lost on the guys that have to make the decision, right? And so I learned from a couple of really good salespeople along the way. I had a couple of account managers that I dealt with early in my career that I was their trusty tech sidekick, and I would listen to them make the pitch, and I was like, oh, okay, that's an interesting way to think about it, and so then I started picking up on a lot of that. And I actually took a sales class. Also, I took a Dale Carnegie sales training class, early in my career too. And it was it was actually taught by one of my sales guys, right? He was a Dale Carnegie instructor also. And so I took that class from him, and I learned a ton. I learned an absolute ton about sales, and I learned along the way that my place in the whole technical storytelling process is really focused around sales, right? We're there to support the sales team as either a solution architect, a systems engineer. And I wrote a cool little blurb on LinkedIn about it the other day. And it's like, look, like that ultimately, you have to, like, somebody's got to sell it, right? And that's what we're there to help do. So the better you can tell the story, the
Yeah.
easier it's going to be for the sales guy to close the deal.
Yeah. What type of research do you do? Just say it's a changing industry or something like that. Because I know part of my process is I always want to start the story with where the customer lives, what their frame of mind is, what their business is. And so I do some LinkedIn stalking and stuff like that because if I can, I learned this a long time ago, like with education, even though a lot of things that happens there is very much the same thing that would happen at Amazon or some other place, but that's not the words that they use, right? That's not, it's almost like you're speaking French to a bunch of English speaking people. If you're not using those words, they don't get it. What type of research and stuff do you do before you go out to sort of have that conversation?
Yeah. So, I mean, I look at, I mean, it's going to depend on the industry for sure. And if it's an industry that I'm familiar with, right? If it's an industry that I've done a lot of work in, let's say age tech, right? I mean, I spent a ton of time working in that space, talking with customers, talking with operators and things like that. So I have a lot of that knowledge. But if I'm working into an area where, I may not have as much knowledge, a lot of things, what I'll do is I'll look at, I'll certainly go up and down the LinkedIn roles, and then I'll also look at things like I'll dig into their website pretty deeply, and then I'll actually do some things. What I've started doing as an interesting sidebar is I've started asking my AI companion, who are their biggest competitors? Who's this company's biggest competitors? And it'll rattle off a list, and then I go stalk those guys too for a little while, and then see what they're all about. And then I do some business research. So I look at, are they publicly traded? Are they a private company? I do a little crunch basing on them to see, hey, look, if they're a startup, are they well funded? Like, so I need to be mindful of what I'm pitching to them or what costing, things like that. And then I do a lot of industry general research about that particular topic or that particular industry, and so that I can understand, what are the problems, who are the customers, what are the people that are using it and why, and things like that, so that when I come in to have that first contact with a customer, I already know a little bit about their industry. But then I also ask them, tell me about your day, tell me about your problems, tell me a story, right? And I like to, as I've told people, many, many times, my role starts and ends with the customer, right? And so, coming in the front door, tell me about a day in your life. I've done a little homework on you guys. I kind of know what you do, but I'm going to hear it through your voice, right? And so I let them tell me the story, and then I take pretty copious notes during those meetings, and then start, picking out areas where, okay, hey, I think this is an area that sounds like they're struggling with, or this is an area where, they really own this space, and how could we help augment that, or, things like that. And it really just comes down to the product that I'm selling, or, or working with them for them to buy. But it's, that's sort of my standard MO. I'm up at, dark 30, pounding away on the keyboard, looking at various articles and research.
Yeah, I know the AI, our assistant, as you call it, has saved me a lot of time doing some of that research. Of course, you always have to go validate it. Is it true? Because it makes stuff up on occasion. But it does save a lot of that legwork, right? That we used to spend a lot of time to do. I mean, back in the day when we were back in the OEM division, it wasn't so easy. You had to read. There's a lot of hard things you still had to read. Your paper-based stuff to go on and do.
Books
and yours was even. Yeah, yours was even worse because you were like in the embedded space, which you had sort of, again, lines up perfectly with what you do today. Less functions, they like Windows, but, we need to, how do we make this where it, like you said, you can't change, you can reboot it. It's reliable. The things that because typically the devices you had didn't have an end user there to the problem existed between the user and the keyboard type thing. So you wanted something that worked.
And a lot of my devices didn't have keyboards, so it was
exactly. So how did what's your best story from any time during the day? This was the hardest thing you really you had that aha moment that sort of changed the whole discussion.
So, I mean, I got a few of them, but I'll take a more recent one. It was, so I spent about 7 years at Amazon. I was like next month would have been 7 years. So I just left a week or so ago. When I first came to Amazon, they recruited me for my knowledge of IoT, of course, IoT, smart control, smart home. I was working for a startup at the time in that space, helping them kind of get their technical program underway. And I'd had a ton of background with the IoT stuff, so I knew smart controls backwards and forwards. And so they wanted somebody that understood smart controls, and they also understood the hospitality industry. And so through a lot of my work that I did while I was at Microsoft, I did point of sale, I did kiosks, digital signs. I mean, all these different embedded devices back then. Now they call them IoT devices. So I had developed a fairly deep level of expertise within the retail hospitality consumer packaged goods segment, right? And so that's really what they wanted. Is they wanted somebody that understood how hotels think. They wanted someone who understood how their business works. They wanted how their IT systems are laid out. And so so that's what they brought me in for. And we very quickly there was a product that was a fledgling product at the time. It was called Alexa for Business, and it was part of AWS. And so we were using that to deploy in hotels while we were building our own native product within Alexa. Had to have been maybe 6 months into the job. I got a phone call from a guy in Chicago. We had deployed at the Wynn Hotel in Las Vegas, so that all the Wynn rooms had an Alexa device in it, and you could open the drapes, and you could turn the lights on and off, and you could talk to the front desk and things like that. It was pretty cool. And this guy in Chicago was the IT director for a place called Admiral on the Lake. They're a very, very, we'll call them, they're pretty high end senior living, senior care facility in the North Lake side of Chicago. And he said, I saw what you guys did. I saw the press for what you guys did with this Wynn thing. And I saw, that you guys are, this hotel product. He goes, I really think that we could put this into my facility and have it be beneficial for seniors. And I said, well, it's interesting because, while technically, yeah, I think it could probably work. This is really targeted at hotels. So things like check in and check out and turn the lights on and set the thermostat and da 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 da. And he said, but like you guys take away a lot of the like consumer Alexa stuff, right? With this. And I said, yeah. And I said, yeah, so like you can't shop on it. It's not going to tell you when you're getting a package or anything like that. I said, because it stays with the room. It's right. It doesn't come and go with the person. It's an ambient device that just lives in the room. And so he said, I think that we could do this. And so we had 4 or 5 conversations about it. And we said, hey, we're new. Let's take a look at it. So we stood him up a tenant and we shipped him some devices, and he stood a few devices up in the property, and it sort of took off like wildfire. And next thing you know, everybody on the property was talking about Alexa. They invited me to come out to Chicago. So I flew out to Chicago for the big hoopla unveiling launch. And I basically sat in a room full of people that were like 75 to like 90 something, right? And just let them pepper me with questions about Alexa, right? Well, she's listening to me all the time, and she's this and she's that. And I sort of had this aha moment. And I said, as I was doing some research, I realized there's a lot of questions that these folks ask that are very repetitive, right? And so then you times that by 200 residents in a building. The person at the front desk has got to just be like, their brain's got to be just ready to explode, right? Because they're answering the same questions over and over and over and over and over again. What time is lunch? 11:30. What time is the mail here? No, that kind of thing, right? And so we said, working with some partners. That aha moment, I said, we need to get a specific skill for Alexa. So Alexa, the way that you work with Alexa is like, if you're not Amazon and you want to work with, plug your stuff into Alexa, you build a skill, right? And it's like an app, right? And it's Alexa's version of an app, right? And so we need an app that's specific to senior living, so that people can ask these questions. And then, Alexa can respond, right? What time is lunch? 11:30. You can ask Alexa that 1,000,000 times and she doesn't care. She's not going to get, she's not going to get burned out. She's not going to quit. She's not, none of that stuff, right? So we sort of had that aha and said, okay, let's work with some partners. So we built a sort of a channel of partners that built software for the senior care industry, right? And so there's a term in senior care called resident engagement, and life enrichment is another one that you hear, another term thrown around. And what that is these people are there to provide activities, provide things to do, prevent boredom, loneliness, things like that. And there's some pretty complex software behind the scenes that can drive that. It's like a CRM, right, for these seniors. It's so you understand what kind of things Mrs. Jones likes to do, and what times does she like to go for breakfast, and does she like to get her hair done once a week, and these different types of things. And so we said, hey, look, if there's a way to plug that data into the Alexa skill, then the residents can just ask, and then Alexa knows from the stuff in the back end systems. And that's very similar to what we were doing in the hotel space, right? I mean, you plug into the property management system, and what time is checkout? Checkout's at 11 o'clock. What's sending my folio? Okay, I've texted a link to your folio to your phone. I mean, those types of things. So that aha really came when we figured out that the residents can get sort of instant gratification. And they don't have to worry about being on hold, and they can ask it as often as they want. The staff members could talk, they could talk to the residents, of course, which is part of their job, but they could focus on more high value conversations with the residents rather than, hey, today lunch is chip, beef, and toast, right? I mean, it was a kind of a great eye opener for us. And then we started incorporating other things into it, like the pendant thing that I told you about. That's called a personal emergency response system, right? Or PERS. And just about every senior care facility on the planet has one. And they come in multiple forms. You've seen them in hospitals, even, where there's the nurse call button on the side, there's a cord on the wall. They have now pendants, they have wearables, things like that. The seniors don't like to wear them. And they don't like to wear the wearables because they sort of think of it as a badge of shame, right? Meaning that they can't govern their own life. They have to have somebody on deck to help them. And so a lot of times they'll take them off when they get into their apartments and things like that. We had several cases where people would take them off and they fell in their apartment, and they've been able to use that particular service to get help. And there's a gal in that Chicago facility that said her storytelling was, my friend Alexa saved my life. And that was just like, boom,
Yeah.
aha. And so we built a whole business around it, and it grew and grew and grew and snowballed. And at the point when I left Amazon, the senior care space was the number one vertical that we served. I mean, we had big resorts, like there was a big deal done with Disney. Big giant resorts like that's hard to put into the competition space. But like against regular hotels, the senior care space was far and above. I mean, the hottest vertical. So it was super cool.
Yeah, it's some people look to us to have the aha moment, and a lot of times, like the example you just gave, it comes from the customer itself. They just can't verbalize it, or they haven't really sat down and thought about it, and just in a conversation they think about it. This person obviously had been giving a lot of thought to it from his experience, which is great. He's thinking in a story, and then he conveyed it to you, and you just sort of picked it up from there. And here's all the possibilities. And I know that's one of the things I like to do is I like to start an opportunity with no guardrail, not necessarily guardrails, but no hurdles that I have to go, no blockers and stuff. So
Sure.
What's possible, thinking about that way. And when I have these conversations, change is hard. And when you're talking to some of these people who've been in IT for as long as we have, but we've always done it that way. And when you're, one of the skills that we have is the ability to think about what's possible and frame it in such a way it's not threatening. You get them to sort of see that, hey, if we start with, there are no limits, what would life be like in 3 years from now if you could have anything that you wanted? Let me tell a story, sort of like you were putting together. And then you, of course, there are, budget regulations, things like that. You can layer them on afterwards, but you're always sort of looking forward. And that's what I always liked about you, is you always had this sort of forward view of things of, okay, what we can do today maybe is not necessarily that exciting, but think about the possibility 3 years from now, what the situation would be. And if we don't start today, it's going to be hard to get there tomorrow, right? So it's sort of setting the expectations, but telling that story, taking them on a journey. Here's what your future could look like based off the stuff that you told me that's a pain in the ass today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No,
Right.
You're spot on. I mean, one of the things I learned along the way was, yes, I am a forward looker and a forward thinker, and I'm always looking around the corner to see, what's the other cool new thing coming down the pike, but not at the expense of what we have in the bag today, right? And so that was a lesson I learned pretty early in my career when I talked myself out of a pretty big deal because they wanted to wait until this new cool thing that was
Yeah.
right around the corner came. And my sales guy was super mad at me, and he was, it's like, you
Yeah.
just killed the deal. And and so I was young. I was in my late 20s, I think, at the time. And so I learned from that, right? And so it became sort of a guiding principle for me, when I work on sales teams is like, yes, talk about futures, talk about, the evolving technology, but not at the expense of what we have in the bag today, right? Sell what you got in the
Yeah.
bag.
Yeah, and in reality, there is a starting point. So even with what you have in the bag, that products or features you're going to add and stuff, there should be a path to get there. And in all reality, the customer is not ready for that future that you just talked about because
Yep.
their organization is not set up right, their processes and stuff. It would be if you tried to, like, 3 years from now, if you tried to do something, here's what's going to happen 3 years now, but how do you prepare them for that 3-year journey to build up those muscles and be in the place where then that makes sense?
Yep.
Because I've been in deals where they wanted to go do something I knew they weren't ready to do. And I said, look, I had to sort of back off and say, look, that's a little ambitious based on what and I don't want to say, like, for example, if you took the entire solution that I'm selling today, you couldn't implement it all.
Right.
You'd be like eating 15 elephants at a time. And it's not fair to them. They get mad. They get a bad taste because they take on too much. So I think setting expectations, and I've heard you do this before, setting expectations. Well, let's crawl, walk, run here, guys.
Yeah.
What we're going to do today, which is on the truck, as you said, it will set you up for the next phase that we go on, so you can realize that future vision that you have.
Yeah, looking down the path. I mean, sell again. Yeah, what's on the truck, what's in the bag, sell that, but build it and architect it so that it does have future applicability. And as things start to look around the corners, and that's rings true sort of in hardware to a certain extent, software, cloud services, and all the new big data and machine learning analytics. I mean, all these things are starting to kind of mesh together, right? And so like the hardware becomes sort of the least of the concern nowadays. Hardware is an endpoint, great. Hardware is an interface, it's a human machine interface, great. But kudos to Nvidia and Intel and on all those guys. I mean, they're making faster, smaller, less power chips. They're better memory, better memory management from the hardware. The operating systems are getting better, things like that, which is great. And it gives you. I mean, now I look at things like I've got an entire Home Assistant deployed. Home Assistant is an open source automation software to run your home with, right? And I've got a Home Assistant deployed here on a Raspberry Pi, right? I mean, a Raspberry, just little, like very, very low power. My primary interface, that's my sort of my experimental that I tinker around with all the new tech. What runs my house it's a product called Habitat Elevation, and they've been around for a while. They're still kind of a startup, but I mean, I've been talking with those guys since I met them at CES, I don't know, several years ago. And that was kind of their first foray out. And so I started tinkering with their stuff, and I love it, right? But it's a little tiny piece of hardware. And where the power is, yes, there's a lot of processing that happens on that device itself, but then it's all the connections to all the various brands of things. So you're not stuck in one brand, and hats off to guys like Crestron and Control 4 and those folks that do these big high-end homes and business stuff. I mean, they've got a great product. They really do. But that product is out of reach for a lot of people, right? I mean, the controllers start at like $10,000, right? I mean, so you got to really, really have a high-end system where like the Habitat Elevation is like $200, right? And so, a couple $100 gets you a hub that's compatible with lots and lots of consumer grade things. But it's the hardware has become so small, so fast, and it's just dead easy now with the hardware. So now the complexities become software and the back end, and how do I make all this stuff talk to each other, and how do I integrate an AI chatbot to it, or how do I integrate how does this thing know automatically that I want to do something at a certain time, or some other input, right? Like we have my wife she loves it and it drives her nuts at the same time, because we got like motion sensors and presence detectors all over the house. Lights just kind of come on and go off on their own and things like that. And sometimes it flubs up and she goes, how come this light won't turn on? So we'll go push the button on the wall. So whoever pushed the button on the wall, light comes on. It's, that kind of thing, right? But we've also kind of morphed that whole smart control thing into our rescue operation for the animals, right? I mean, we've got dogs here and we've got parrots here. Those are our two kind of primary focus. And parrots have to have a lot of sleep. Parrots sleep like 12 to 14 hours a day. Their little bodies, when they're awake, are constantly consuming energy. And so they need to recharge. And so they need a big, long line to recharge. So you got to either cover their cage or you got to make the room dark, right? And so I've done a bunch of automations where I've got blackout roller shades in some rooms. And at certain time, when it's bedtime, the shades will drop automatically, the lights turn off, things like that. And I've even gone as far as to, like Alexa sings them a song and that kind of thing. So it's kind of fun, but it has genuine utility, because now I don't have to remember at 8 o'clock, shoot, I got to run up there and close the blinds. So otherwise the birds are going to squawk all night, that kind of thing. Right. So it's been fun. And so I'm incorporating a lot of that. I'm also working with some folks that are like part of the ADHD community in Seattle. There's an organization called CHAD, and I'm helping them with some techie stuff, but also we're looking at how lighting impacts people with ADHD or people on the autism spectrum, things like that. And different tones and different temperatures of light or different colors of light can help significantly for that. And so as a matter of fact, I'm doing some research right now on that for a paper / presentation I'm going to do for the CHAD folks.
Mm-hmm. A nice pivot in. I hear one of your rescue talking in the background, so you sort of go, "What started the rescue? What's the story behind that?"
Yeah, so my wife and I we got married in 2003, and we got a house, had a big yard, and I said my kids were from my previous marriage, but they were still pretty young, and I said, every kid needs a dog, right? I mean, every kid should have a dog at least once, right, in their childhood. Dogs are great, and so we went out, we adopted a dog, a German Shepherd. Her name was Sasha. We got her from the local Humane Society, local animal shelter. And then Sasha turned into another dog, Harley, because Sasha needed a friend, right? So now we got Harley, Sasha and Harley as the two dogs. And then as we sort of moved along, we were always very, very big advocates for the animals. We gave to the SPCAs and the local shelters, and we volunteered time and things like that. And we sort of became known in some of the rescue circles as, sort of angels, right? Is what they would call us, as like people who don't operate a rescue themselves, yet they, they're very involved with rescues. They help out. They do animal transport, vet transport, things like that. They help pay the bills. They help raise money, what have you. And so we did a lot of that for a while. And then next thing you know, we wound up with a couple more dogs, and then we had some cats, and then and so then, like pretty soon we got a little critter farm at the house, and we moved to a bigger house, of course. And so with bigger house comes more animals, apparently that's the rule. And so next thing you know, we said, hey, look, we're going to continue to do this rescue thing, and we might as well just, have our own rescue, call it what you want. So we are a little different than a traditional rescue, because like I don't have big acreage here with, tons and tons of dog kennels and aviaries and things like that. We operate, in certain cases, we'll bring an animal in, and then in certain cases we adopt them out. I always make the running joke, like, if they come here, they stay here. I mean, that's just sort of the rule. But it's not always the rule, but each one of them has a story, has a unique story. And all of our animals here all have had either some sort of medical or behavioral problem that made them less than desirable for adoption, right? And so birds are an interesting one. So, I mean, dogs, everybody knows. I mean, sometimes you get dogs with medical problems, like the little one sitting behind me over here, the little tan one that's on the pillow back here. These two are my two Frenchies. And the little tan one, she came to us with a condition called open fontanelle, which is the skull plates hadn't grown together fully in utero. And so she was very, very fragile, like a small bump to the head could kill her. And so we had to carry her around literally everywhere for like the first 6 months we had her.
Couldn't put a helmet on her?
So we thought about that, like, like anything we put near her head, she just tried to eat. So it was, she was a puppy, right? So, I mean, she was like this big when we got her. She's a little teeny tiny puppy. And so we nursed her back to health over time. The skull plates grew together, and she was, and She's a little slow. We don't talk about it a lot because she's very sensitive about it. But she's a little on the slow side mentally.
Mm,
But she's just a holy spitfire the rest of the time. And like she has two speeds, like full and asleep. I mean,
yeah.
those are the two speeds she has, and she's a great dog. She's a total sweetheart. But she needed help. And so, I mean, we spent, several $1,000s in vet bills, when she first came to us to make sure that she was going to be healthy. Same thing applies with birds. Birds come into rescue. The thing that people don't realize about birds, especially parrots, they live extraordinarily long lives. Where like, a good long life for a dog or a cat's going to be somewhere 15-ish years, right? 15, 20 years,
Yeah.
somewhere that neck of the woods. Like there are birds that live 80 or 90 years, right? And
Wow.
so, like I've got several birds here that will outlive me.
Mm,
And so, you have to think about that when you adopt birds, or when you like what happens a lot of times is people will go to a breeder and they'll buy a bird, right? And they'll buy a baby, and which is, no disrespect to the breeders and no disrespect to people who want baby birds. They're cute and you can train them very, very deeply, train them if you get them as a baby. I mean, it's like all the videos you see floating around on Facebook and stuff like that of birds like doing advanced tricks and things like that. It's generally because somebody's had that bird since it was a baby, and it was just very much because it's all repetition and it's all structure. So people will wind up as empty nesters in their fees, and to fill the void for them, they'll go get a bird. They'll go get a baby bird when they're 50 years old, not realizing that this bird could live 80 years. And so then what happens is, mom and dad pass away. The kids are left with an estate, that they have to deal with. And then part of the estate is this bird. And they don't know what to do with the bird. They don't necessarily want the bird. They're not equipped to take care of the bird. Birds require lots of attention. They require lots of care and feeding and things like that. And so the birds wind up in rescue.
mm,
So, I mean, bird rescues are constantly overrun with birds, and of all the various varieties. And each one of these birds have very unique traits. They have very unique considerations. There's potential medical issues. There are, and you have to, when they see a vet, they have to see a specialist vet. You can't take it to just like the band field or, to the dog and cat vet. The vets are called avian specialists, right? Or avian veterinarians. And we're pretty fortunate. We've got one that's right up the street and we know her super well. So she's our bird vet. But it's, it gets expensive. I mean, a regular visit to the vet, just a checkup visit, starts at like $200. And then next
mm.
thing you know, any blood work, there's another couple $100. Next thing you know, if you have to have an x-ray done on a bird, the bird has to be put under anesthesia in order to do an x-ray, because the bird won't hold still long enough to get an x-ray, right? So you have to put the bird under anesthesia. So like an x-ray for a bird can be upwards of $1,000, right? And so that's diagnostically, that's the first thing you do with a bird when you think there's a problem, is you take an x-ray, because birds can't tell you when they're sick like dogs do. Like birds don't vomit on a regular basis. They do when there's certain conditions where they will. But that kind of thing, there's lots of things that you have to take into consideration with birds. And so that's part of why so many birds wind up in rescue. And so we just do our part. I've always been a bird guy, loved them my entire life. It was never conducive to have birds up until about 3-4 years ago for us, because we had our kids in the house. We didn't have any spare bedrooms. We didn't have this, we didn't have that. And so kids all moved out. They're grown and gone, and hopefully never to return. I love them dearly, but hey, it's I did my job, right? They're gone. And so I started with a couple of birds, brought in a pair of African gray parrots, from a rescue, and started working with them, having fun with them. And next thing you know, we wound up with a couple of Amazon parrots. And the next thing you know, here comes a couple more Amazon parrots. And it just sort of snowballs. And it's, so we, back in 2017, we said, look, we've been self-funding all of this rescue operation for, its existence since, we started doing real rescue stuff about 2004. Right. And so, and it's just, when they need something, I write a check. And so I said, look, at a certain point, I got to start putting some retirement savings away, and I got to, So I said, we need to formalize this a little bit. So we formed the actual business and registered as a business in 2017. And then at the very tail end of last year, we had all of our ducks in a row and all the paperwork and everything done. And we got our 501c3, which is the federal nonprofit designation, so that people who donate to us can write it off on their taxes.
That's quite the journey and quite the investment, as you say. It's we the dogs we've had are rescue dogs.
Good.
I love them. We had a couple purebreds early on, and for whatever the rescue dogs seem to be grateful if that actually comes across for what comes on. But they too have their own things. Like I said, they're all individual. My wife, birds flying around my wife's head freak her out a little bit, so I don't think we'll be maybe doing a bird rescue.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, my wife was terrified of birds. And she said, okay, if you get these two birds, they're your birds. I'm not messing with them. I'm not this, I'm not that. And then she came in the room for something. She was talking to me about something. And one of the birds, gabbed off he said something, and she goes, oh my God. And then next thing you know, I had one of them, sitting on her arm, and she was scratching his head and all. And then she just sort of fell in love. And, what really did it for her was we took in late last year, we took in a very senior scarlet macaw. He was like 47, 48 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And his name was Pilot, and he was a beautiful bird. He'd been with the same guy his entire life. The guy passed away. Family didn't know what to do, so they released him to us. And she immediately, it was interesting because birds typically bond to like a person, and that's their person, and that's their person for like their entire life, right? And so, and so like when I picked this bird up, like he stepped up onto my arm and he was fine. And I got him home, put him on a play stand while I was getting his cage ready. And Christy came in the room and he perked up, he stepped up onto her arm, and those two were inseparable at that point. And at that point, from that point forward, the bird wanted nothing to do with me. Like every time I tried to step him up, he'd try to bite me. He didn't want anything. He didn't want me at all. He had mama. And it was super interesting because like he was with a man his entire life, and birds will sometimes gravitate toward a man or a woman, but he was with this guy his entire life. And all of a sudden he bonds to my wife. And I mean, love. And it turned out he had a tumor in his belly that nobody knew about. And, it's because they're super, like I said, they're super stoic. They can't tell you they're sick. We had there became some visual evidence of the fact that something was wrong. So we got him to the vet. They found the tumor. And as a result of the stress from the tumor and the anesthesia and things like that, he had a stroke and he passed away the next day. Yeah. And she was devastated. I mean, crushed. And, but she's got so much love in her heart. And that's really what brought me into this, right? Was her. I mean, she's such an animal lover. And now she loves birds, and she's constantly downstairs chitter-chattering with the birds, and she's giving them treats and trying to get them to step up and things like that. She's been bit a few times. She doesn't like that.
Well, I mean, there's a downside to everything. Maybe the bird's former owner was a ladies' man, and so maybe that's why.
Yeah, you never know, man. You never know. But yeah, we do a lot of good work with that. Cool. It's and again, we take donations. I mean, my long-term vision for the rescue is we want to raise about $4 or $5 million, and we want to build a sanctuary here in the local area, and with a house on it and a barn and all that stuff, and live there.
Yeah.
And then create a legacy so that when we pass on, somebody else takes it over. They can live there, they can operate it, things like that. So more like a trust, right?
So, and we'll put all these things in the show notes on how you get a hold of John in the rescue and all for that one. But, on a personal level, John still likes to be employed, and I can't think of a better storyteller out there. So if you're in need of that, please, we'll put the contact information, reach out to him on LinkedIn. He's there a lot as well. And, John, it's been great catching up. There's some things, even though we were together for, I don't know how many years, I forget how many years we were together at Microsoft, and so there's always extra stories to tell. We didn't have any adult beverages this time, which is probably a good thing.
Probably a good thing.
That brings out some
getting older, man.
we have some of the other stories that from our youth. We'll call it our youthful days.
Yes,
they had
exactly.
that. But thanks, John. And again, how can they reach out to you on LinkedIn? Is that the best place?
Yeah, it's just linkedin.com whack, and it's J Coyne. I mean, you throw a link up there or something, but yeah, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. The website is 9livesrescue.org. So it's all words, 9livesrescue.org. And you can contact me there as well. So it's, like I said, happy to take any support anybody wants to give. If anybody, shameless plug for me, as Doug mentioned. I mean, if anybody needs a slightly used storyteller / sales engineer / do it all kind of guy, hey, let's talk.
It's experienced, it's not used. It's experienced, it's not
Right.
used.
Heavily experienced, slightly used.
There you go. There we go. Yeah, but you can hang out with the young people as well. That's a great thing. So John, thanks a lot again. Good luck on the rescue as well, and we'll stay in touch.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks for listening to the Doug Thompson podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. And share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. This really helps spread the message. Visit thedougthompson.com to join our growing community. Until next time, keep connecting, keep speaking, and keep making a difference.